These unfortunate events meant that the articles never appeared in their entirety in Japan, and also that they did not receive the attention they merited. Japan was in a state of confusion for several years after the earthquake, and it is in any case doubtful that many readers were able to understand Husserl's phenomenological idea, especially since there was no major text by Husserl in Japanese language. Nishida and his disciples had read Ideen 1 in German, but the first Japanese translation was not published until 1939. And Husserl himself had published only a few articles since Ideen in 1913, although he was working intensively to develop and elaborate his phenomenological method. Philosophically speaking, the published Kaizo articles focused on the individual and argued for the possibility of an ethical renewal of the community from the rationalistic and a prioristic viewpoint of Husserl's early thinking. In Japan, this emphasis of the individual was regarded as one-sided. It was only later that Husserl published an elaborated analysis of intersubjectivity, the solution of which also requires the transcendental reduction, and developed his argument in a direction that was more interesting to Japanese scholars. In the Kaizo articles, Husserl keeps his Japanese reader in mind and directs his argument toward a universality that surmounts cultural differences. But in order to think fully about cultures and cultural communities, and also about the teleology of history, we must refer to Husserl's argument in later writings, such as Ideen 2, the lectures on first philosophy, the Vienna lecture, and Crisis. These are the main writings of Husserl in the later year. Husserl's thinking regarding these problems were not fully ripe at the time. He was, we must say, in transition to the next stage. For these reasons, and also, as I have already mentioned, because the translation of his masterpiece, Ideen 1, was delayed until 1939, I am skeptical that Kaizo articles were properly understood by the majority of readers when they were published. It was not these articles that boosted Husserl's popularity in Japan. It was rather the painstaking study of phenomenology by academics such as Nishida, Tanabe, and others that created the groundwork for the development of Japanese phenomenology in post-war Japan. Section 3. Phenomenological remarks on the problem of translation. Although I do not believe that the Kaizo articles were influential in Japan, I do believe that they contain important ideas for the development of the ongoing phenomenological discussion of the problem of Eurocentrism and European rationalism, and therefore of intercultural phenomenology. Husserl is certain that certain things are a priori, and that this also holds for the realm of ethics. Thus, any relativism that denies the a priori, such as psychologism or historicism, must be rejected. Humans have the ability to discover and ascertain the a priori, and that ability is called reason. Although this steadfast belief in reason was established in ancient Greece in form of philosophy and science, and subsequently carried over into European tradition, this belief was in a state of crisis, as Husserl wrote the Kaizo article, or at least Husserl thought so. The catastrophe of World War I, which also took the life of Husserl's son, brought home the crisis to many Europeans. Husserl did not regard this as an accidental or contingent disaster, but as a manifestation of the failure of European rationalism. Financial problems due to hyperinflation in Germany seem to have motivated Husserl to write for Kaizo, but even the humiliating state of Germany's economy may have struck him as another aspect of the failure of European rationalism. This would have been another ground for choosing the problem of rationalism as his central theme. A renewal of European rationalism was called for. For such a renewal, the role of individual who can detach himself from the irrational historical situation and not follow it blindly, who is in this sense free and responsible to himself, is decisive. Only an individual like this could gain a rational insight into the a priori and thus renew Europe. The intellectual history of Japan took various ironic turns after World War II. In correlation with various attacks on Heidegger for his ambivalent relationship to Nazism, it is now very important problem of today now. Critics also turned on Husserl for his ideas of European rationality and Europeanization, which may exclude other cultures. A major target was Husserl's statement in the Vienna lecture. Quote, "There is something special about Europe that all other human groups find perceptible in us as something which, regardless of its usefulness, becomes a motive for them to Europeanize themselves, whereas we, if we understand ourselves correctly, will never Indianize ourselves, for example." End of quote. Now, I myself acknowledge that I am Europeanized. I am, after all, speaking now in English about philosophy, for which Japanese originally had no word. It is a new, for us, a new word, philosophy. But I am also Sinicized, since I use Chinese characters and words of Chinese origin when I read and write Japanese. I am also partly Indianized, since Buddhist rituals are part of my life in Japan. I am not pure Japanese, but have been contaminated by many foreign influences. At the very least, I am a hybrid cultural product. In a provisional manuscript for Kaizo articles, Husserl writes of the possibility of attaching, quote, the Japanese nation as a young, fresh-burdened branch of European culture, end of quote. And as that, quote, when it, namely Japanese nation, commits to European science and philosophy zealously and successfully, the particular predicaments of European culture cannot remain foreign to it, end of quote. These comments, although made provisionally, can be considered a germination of the theory of Europeanization that becomes clearer in Husserl's later writings, particularly in the Vienna lecture. Morimura Osan, a contemporary Japanese researcher of phenomenology, criticized Husserl's Eurocentric stance in Kaizo articles and says his idea of Europeanization is a complacent judgment. This may be true in the last analysis, but I do not agree with Morimura entirely, because his criticism is directed from a third-person perspective, as if he himself could transcend all cultures and speak with complete neutrality. His criticism conceals a more important problem, the problem of what Europe means for me. This problem is more serious and more essential than whether Husserl himself was complacent or not. Now, I would like to begin again to clarify what it means that this is a problem for me. Historicism as a relativism claims that my present viewpoint is not absolute, but there are many historical viewpoints that something that appears as a priori from my viewpoint is not so from other viewpoints, and so on. This is also the case with psychologism. But this claim itself as a whole, which include my and other viewpoints, lies within my viewpoint. The I of the latter my is the transcendental ego. The transcendental ego appeared in European history with Descartes, with the statement, Je pense donc je suis, but was immediately forgotten. The individual who is needed, in Husserl's view, to renew Europe is this I, since it is only the transcendental I who can make rationality complete. Relativism, on the other hand, is depend on the self-forgetfulness of this I. That is, relativism depends on thinking that the I can transcend my view and observe everything, including myself on the earth and in the world, as if from the heights of the heavens. Husserl characterized this as a transcending act of thinking, or a transcending interpretation. It is this fundamentally irrational way of thinking that leads to relativism. Transcending, in this sense, is a counter-nation of transcendental. Husserl executes the epoche and reduction to arrive at the transcendental I and its viewpoint. The a priori is encountered by the I only through reflection, which is a counter notion of the self-forgetfulness of the transcendental I. Now, not every I who uses the pronoun I is a transcendental ego. It is only the I who execute the epoche and reduction, and thereby is capable of reflection. This I, in contrast to the self-forgetful I, reflectively know that it makes no sense to transcend itself and its viewpoint. It is impossible to transcend my view. Everything is in my view. Nevertheless, it must continue to use the mundane pronoun I and mundane language in general in order to express itself, since there is no such thing as a transcendental language. Transcendental insights are necessarily expressed in mundane language, and in that sense are contaminated by the mundane. At the same time, it is this mundaneness that keeps the transcendental I open to the world and prevents it from being isolated. This means that phenomenological expression requires a translation between transcendentality and mundanity. Without translation, not only the idea of Europeanization, but all phenomenological statements regarded only in the mundaneness could be regarded as complacent. Now, let us go back to the phenomenological problem of Europe. The I, as a transcendental ego, is not human being in the world, since the world lies within the view of the I. A human being can be determined, for example, European or Italian or Japanese. But this is a mundane determination that does not apply to the I as a transcendental ego. Nevertheless, Husserl refers to the European and Europe in the Kaizo articles. What does this mean? In the same way that the je of Je pense donc je suis is not Descartes himself. Namely, that is, Je pense donc je suis does not just mean Descartes pense donc Descartes est. The transcendental I, of which Husserl speaks, is not Husserl, who is also European. Yet Husserl writes as if Europe has a special determination for the transcendental I. Furthermore, I myself, with the mundane identity of Tōru Tani, namely Japanese, do not directly share in this Europeanness. So, I must reconsider my relation to Europe. Husserl wrote the Kaizo article for Japanese journal, so it was natural for him to distinguish between Europe and Japan. However, I do not believe the articles were written only for Japanese. Europe was for Husserl a universal problem. In what way was Husserl universal? Was Europe for universal for Husserl? Let us consider the problem phenomenologically. There are two ways to think about this. The first possibility is to say humanity in general is essentially, or at least potentially, rational. The essence of humanity is rationality. This rationality was actualized and realized in ancient Greece and then inherited by Europe, but not by other cultures. This gives Europe primacy in terms of rationality. But we can see easily that this interpretation lacks the transcendentality that is central to phenomenology. It is an interpretation that is formed simply from the mundane, from the third-person perspective, that presupposes a transcending act of thinking. The second possibility is to say, to the contrary, in the beginning appears something philosophical in me as a primal fact, without which nothing philosophical begins. The appearance of this primal fact is not the actualization or realization of an essence of humanity in general. It precedes any mundane relationship between an essence and its realization. It is transcendental. But I can name it philosophy only by using the mundane traditional words philosophia, which originate in ancient Greek, and indeed there was no Japanese word for it. In encountering the word philosophia, I encounter also in myself a rational, or better, logical tendency. I found that I am not isolated in myself, but have a tendency to expression that is mediated by logos or language. And I